Sorry I missed you all on the live show this past Saturday. However, I was having some technical difficulties on my side. Hopefully I've gotten them all figured out at this point, but quite honestly, the only performance that was worse than my Comcast internet this past weekend was Ben Watson. What's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners, talking about Week 13 waiver wire targets. And let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, after a call like Ben Watson, all I can do is poke a little bit of fun at myself and say we're going to rebound and make some better calls this week. We're going to start jumping into it right away. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, all the good stuff before we jump into it. But let's kick it off with quarterbacks and talk about who we're going to be streaming this week with an early week with a lot of Thanksgiving games. My preference for quarterbacks to stream this week, and it might not even be needed. We're done with the bye weeks. Those are done and out of the way, so you might not even need a streaming option. However, we have had some injuries at the position this year, so if you need to get by with somebody this week, if you've already been streaming and you need to do it again, I've got three guys for you to take a look at. In these three individuals, I have them ranked in order of preference this week. The nice thing about these three quarterbacks is all three of these quarterbacks are facing teams that they're in the top 5 of most fantasy points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks. Sam Darnold from the New York Jets, he's my favorite. He gets Cincinnati. They're giving up the third most points. This offense is looking pretty good right now. Now, again, it's been against less than stellar competition, but Cincinnati has a defense that isn't really all that good. Don't mind the fact that they held the Steelers to very few points this weekend because that was all Mason Rudolph. We've got a better offense facing him this week. We're going to run with Sam Darnold after his terrific performance in Week 12. Nick Foles coming in after that. He gets Tampa Bay, and yes, Tampa Bay did hold Matt Ryan down and that offense in Atlanta. However, I'm going to trust in Nick Foles to get the job done against them this weekend, this coming up weekend. And then Mitchell Trubisky, if you're feeling a little frisky, Headliner Nation, then maybe you can run with Mitchell Trubisky at only 18% owned against Detroit, giving up the fourth most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's if you're feeling frisky. I'm not feeling that frisky, so I am not going to recommend starting Mitchell Trubisky to basically anyone. But if you're in a deeper league, or if you're in a situation where other quarterbacks are owned, maybe you're like in a 2QB super flex league, something like that, maybe take a shot at Mitchell Trubisky. But it's only going to be under the most severe circumstances that you make that call. But I just wanted to toss him out there because of how bad Detroit's defense has been. All right, let's move forward to one of the more important positions that we're looking at in terms of streaming or picking guys up off the waiver wire. And with the running backs this week, it has to be led by Rashad Penny at 46% owned by Seattle. Chris Carson, another costly fumble. He's had those issues. Now, Seattle has not walked away from him in the past because of these issues. They continue to feed him the ball. However, when Rashad Penny took over in this game, it was all said and done. What's going to happen moving forward? We have to keep an eye on the language and the communication coming out of Seattle this week, determining what's going to happen with this backfield in Week 13. 14 carries, 129 yards, and a touchdown for Rashad Penny. When you average 9.2 yards per carry, that's not anything that you scoff at. Those are terrific numbers. Those are the type of numbers we thought we'd be getting when he was drafted by Seattle last year. He does have a tough Minnesota matchup next week. This is a team that basically took Ezekiel Elliott out of the game plan when they faced Dallas a couple weeks ago. However, you have to take a look, especially if you're a Chris Carson owner. If you own Chris Carson, then Rashad Penny has to be your number one waiver wire pickup this week. He has to be your number one target, because if Carson were to sit any, it's going to be Penny that's going to move forward as the starter, and you have to have that depth. You have to be able to replace Carson. Penny's going to be the guy. Bo Scarborough. We're going to go ahead and roll with him again this week. 44% owned, up from last week. He's the locked-in lead back right now. The next closest running back to him was Ty Johnson with only 4 carries. So Scarborough is going to continue to get those looks in that backfield. He does get Chicago this week. Chicago's been pretty good against the run this year. However, Detroit has shown a commitment to pounding the football, to getting the run game going. So is he going to be a guy that you're going to start as a running back 1 or 2? Probably not, but if you're in a pinch, if you need somebody for your flex position, Bo Scarborough could be a guy that you could take a look at. 18 carries for 98 yards this past week, but maybe it's not this week you're picking him up for. Maybe it's just for down the road, for you playoff teams out there. If you need a little extra depth in case any injuries happen, then Scarborough is going to be a guy that is going to get a lot of volume, even if he doesn't have a ton of efficiency with it. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on. Jonathan Williams from Indianapolis, he completely hinges on Marlon Mack. That's going to all depend on what Marlon Mack does with his injury. 29% owned this week, again, up a little bit from last week. I'm surprised it's only 29%, though. A lot of people were in on Jonathan Wilkins. When I found out Wilkins was going to be active, I thought Wilkins might get a little bit more look than what Williams did. However, right before game time, we found out that Williams was going to end up being the lead back, and Wilkins probably wouldn't see a whole lot of action against Houston on Thursday Night Football last week. But with Williams moving forward, because he did play so well, 29 touches, 121 total yards, and a touchdown. He carried the load last week, and more than likely, because of how well he did, they will continue to let him carry the load moving forward until Marlon Mack is ready to actually step back in. But how long is that going to be? We don't know at this point. Going with Benny Snell out of Snell. Benny Snell out of Pittsburgh, only 2% owned. And again, this relies on James Conner. So there's a whole lot of ifs with this group this week. Bo Scarborough is the only guy that we're not looking at and saying, well, he might have a little bit of competition or somebody could take away from him. He's the only lead back. However, all these guys you need to target. Could he end up being the lead back now? If James Conner ends up sitting out a little bit longer, is Snell going to be the guy they use on a more regular basis? Again, no guarantee with him, but he did have 98 yards and 21 carries against Cincinnati. And the thing that I found really interesting about this backfield against Cincinnati, the Steelers, even though they were down at times, even though they were not playing ahead, even though it was a negative game script at some points, Jalen Samuels only saw 3 targets, so he wasn't even used in the passing game that much, which is hard to fathom at times. So Benny Snell could end up being the guy moving forward. We'll have to wait and see, but definitely a running back target for you this week. 4 wide receivers to take a look at this week, and number 1 has to be Deebo Samuel, and it only went 41% owned. I was kind of shocked by that. I thought after the last couple of weeks he would be highly owned, and he would be well over that 50% mark. Maybe it was a little bit of the Green Bay game that scared him off. However, keep in mind, I record this show during Sunday Night Football, so the game is not completely done as of yet. Now, when I'm recording, San Francisco looks awesome. Not only do they look awesome, Samuel has 2 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown against a Green Bay defense that's been pretty good at times this year. So with that being said, though, his previous 3 games, 28 targets, 20 receptions, 286 yards. So he's looking fantastic out there right now. Really a guy that is emerging as the top target outside of George Kittle for Jimmy Garoppolo, and this offense needs it. Dante Pettis was supposed to be that guy. He's been nothing so far this season. Deebo Samuel becoming that guy moving forward, possibly. Depends on what happens with Emmanuel Sanders. Maybe they'll go back and forth a little bit. Whatever it may end up being, he's definitely looking like a guy that you want to own moving forward. At number 2, Randall Cobb. He's looking fantastic as well. At only 39% owned, that makes a little bit more sense to me. You have Amari Cooper, okay? Obviously, he's the wide receiver 1 there. Michael Gallup's been really, really good. So you have 2 options above him in terms of the wide receivers. So maybe people are a little bit more hesitant to try and add Randall Cobb. However, we need to add him this week. We need to get him up over 50%. I don't want to talk about him another week because he's been fantastic. Even with Cooper, even with Gallup, he has still found a role in that offense. His last 3 games, 4 for 86, 4 for 115, 6 for 106. Over his last 3 games, he has 30 targets. Now, he does get Buffalo this weekend on Thanksgiving. That's a tough matchup, okay? That is a tough matchup. However, because you have to commit so many resources to Gallup and Cooper, also to the run game with Ezekiel Elliott, Randall Cobb could find himself in a position to have another good week. I don't think he's going to have a week like we saw these past 3 weeks. I don't think he's going to have a huge week. However, I think he could be good for a few receptions. He could get you anywhere between 40 and 60 yards, and the hope is that he finds himself another touchdown. That's what we're hoping for with Randall Cobb this week against Buffalo. Russell Gage from Atlanta, only 3% owned right now. And we're keeping an eye on Julio Jones. Now, Julio Jones had an injury issue this past weekend. Does he miss any time? More than likely not. Julio Jones is always banged up. He always plays. Very rarely is he missing any time. We'll see, though, okay? Atlanta's in the middle of really a lost season right now. So do they want to run him out there if he's experiencing any issues? Russell Gage has been making very minimal of an impact, but enough to take a look at him. Julio, again, went down. Any lingering issues, what's going to happen with that? 10 targets last week. He went 8 for 76. Gage did. So he was obviously in the passing game. Julio ended up having 9 targets. Gage had 10 targets. Over the last 4 games, he has 28 targets. So they've been looking at him. Even with Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones on the field, they've been taking a look at him. Austin Hooper, when is he back? As long as Austin Hooper isn't back, Gage is a guy that we're going to continue to look at because Atlanta is going to have to keep throwing the football. Finally, lastly, this one, Darius Slayton this week, 22% owned. We've been talking about Darius Slayton since the preseason as a deep sleeper, and I want to bring him up again. We didn't talk about him last week because he was on the bye this week. So, coming up now, this week in week 13, he's going up against Green Bay. Okay, Green Bay has been, again, pretty good against opposing teams so far. However, they just got lit up. Okay, they just got lit up by the San Francisco 49ers. They're going to be looking for a little bit of a revenge game. More than likely want to get back on track. However, Darius Slayton, even a tough matchup this past week against Chicago, still played well. Still played very well. 21 targets his last 2 games. He's the deep play guy. He's the deep threat guy. And he still had 7 targets this past week, even with Sterling Shepard being back and with Golden Tate being back. Now, the one thing we want to keep an eye on, though, is Evan Ingram. And we're going to talk about that in a minute under tight end, because I want to talk about that position this coming week. However, Darius Slayton, I've talked about it again and again. I just want to reiterate, his skill set fits perfectly with the players that the Giants have right now. He is the deep threat guy. When you have to commit resources underneath to a Sterling Shepard, to a Saquon Barkley, to a Golden Tate, guys that run really quick routes over the middle of the field, down in the flats, things like that, when you have to commit so many resources up near the box, it lets a player slip by every once in a while, and that's what Darius Slayton can do. He's a boom or bust guy, absolutely, but he can score a touchdown at any point in time. All right, for week 13, 4 options at tight end. Let's talk about the top 3 guys I have listed. Jacob Hollister at 39%. He is number 1. Yes, not a great game this past week, but it was a tough matchup for him. Still saw 4 targets. Is still a red zone threat for Russell Wilson, and is still going to be a go-to guy for Russell Wilson. Even with Josh Gordon, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf, I think that just helps Jacob Hollister. I think that just helps get him open even a little bit more. So I am still going to add him this week and potentially stream him if I need to, but just keep an eye on it. He's a guy I definitely want to own the rest of the season. If you don't want to stream him this week, still think about grabbing him just in case. Number 2, Kyle Rudolph, 40% owned. A lot of this is going to hinge on Adam Thielen. Is Thielen going to be back this week? A lot of us speculate, yes, he will be back in week 13. They had the bye last week. He was almost back a couple of weeks ago, but shut him down. Let him rest, get through the bye. We'll see what happens when he comes back. I want to play Kyle Rudolph against Seattle this week, who gives up over 13 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. But if Adam Thielen is in, that's really going to restrict some of that. So for some of you that don't have to give up a high waiver priority, but you need a tight end this week, Kyle Rudolph is a guy that I might take a look at on the waiver wire, see what happens throughout the week, and then if you have to drop him, really no harm, no foul. Don't waste a waiver priority on him, though. David Njoku at 20%, going to also take a look at him this week. Was close to playing this past week. He's in practice. He's back, however, ended up being inactive. But he gets Pittsburgh, who allows over 14 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, so it could be a really good matchup for him. Now, the final name I have listed here, Caden Smith from the New York Giants, okay? Evan Ingram and Rhett Ellison. Both of those guys have to be out for this to work, okay? So this is not a guy that you're picking up right now. This is not a guy that you're using a waiver priority on or you're spending any fab on. You're not doing any of that. Caden Smith is a guy that you're going to just keep your eye on as the week progresses. If for some reason Evan Ingram cannot make it in this week, if for some reason Rhett Ellison cannot make it in this week, we are going to pick up Caden Smith and potentially start him. Keep an eye out for my start and sit video. I'm not going to rank him as high as Ben Watson did. Nothing crazy like that. However, if those two guys are out, I'm going to have Caden Smith up near tight end 1 status. He's going to probably be anywhere between that 12 and 14 mark. And as we saw this past week with tight ends, it didn't really take a whole lot to be a tight end 1. It was a disaster in week 12. Keep in mind, though, Green Bay gives up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and they just got slaughtered by George Kittle, who was apparently playing on a broken ankle. George Kittle is a whole nother beast. Him and Caden Smith are not even in the same category. However, Kittle's been injured and apparently has a broken ankle and still had a huge game against Green Bay. Okay, they could not stop him. What's going to happen with Ingram? What's going to happen with Ellison? Again, we're not picking up Caden Smith right now. I just want to throw that name out there for you. So as the week progresses, if these two guys cannot make it in, we're taking a look at Smith in week 13. All right, last but not least, our defensive streaming options for week 13. I've got 3 of them for you. Philadelphia, who's going to get Miami. Green Bay, who's going to get the New York Giants, and the New York Jets, who are going to get the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, with Philly, they get Miami. Miami, teams that are playing against Miami are typically scoring at least 13 fantasy points per game. Okay, so it's a decent play for Philadelphia against Miami. For the Green Bay Packers, they're getting the New York Giants. That's the 3rd most. So defensive teams that are playing against the New York Giants are scoring the 3rd most fantasy points per game. So that's another good option for you. The New York Jets, though, are probably going to be one of my favorite options going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. The New York Jets alone, their defense was supposed to be really good this year, but it was sloppy and bad at the beginning of the season. They've turned it on. Over their last 3 weeks, they've scored at least double-digit fantasy points. Their defensive special teams units have. So this is a team that has scored 11 and 13 and 13. So they are definitely options for you this week. Take a look at them. They're probably going to be my number 1 choice going up against Cincinnati. That team's just in disarray right now. That's just a really bad team. Pittsburgh tried to leave the door open for them all day long this past Sunday, and they couldn't do anything about it. But anyways, New York Jets are probably going to be my first option. Again, the last 3 weeks have scored at least double-digit fantasy points on defense. So definitely an option to get you through this week if you're looking to stream somebody. There you have it, Headliner Nation. Your options for the waiver wire here in week 13. Take a look, spend a little fab money, use a waiver priority. We're getting down to the nitty gritty now. Playoffs are right here, right around the corner. So if you need a little bit of extra to help you get there, or you need to establish a little bit of depth for in the playoffs, got a few guys here for you that could definitely help. Headliner Nation, as always, if you appreciate the content, hit that like button for me. We always appreciate the likes. And of course, if you're new to the channel, if you haven't subscribed to the Fantasy Headliners yet, I recommend you do so now. Hit that follow button down below, subscribe to the channel, and then also turn on the bell notification. So anytime we drop new content or go live, you're going to know right away. And of course, if you have any questions, leave a comment below. Headliner Nation, good luck in week 13. Let's prepare to get a dub this week. We're going to have a good week, ladies and gentlemen. Best of luck. I'll see you on the next show, and have a good one.